If you found this video, you probably had a sudden loss of power and the manual adjustment cable on the handlebars isn't, working to regain any of that power you're having with your all-wheel drive Toro. And more than likely it's due to the belts, but you probably couldn't find any belt replacement videos or write-ups on it because it's an all-wheel drive, it's not front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive, which are generally the dedicated videos for. So I hope this helps in, swapping out the belts and fixing the issue and regaining your all-wheel drive. Tools needed, pretty much just going to need a kind of a square bit, and the rest is 10 millimeter with exception of one 13 millimeter, and then a pair of needle nose. And supplies needed are just, 2 belts, and the one labeled V belt is the front, and then belt V is the rear belt. Probably obvious, but before beginning any work, remove the spark plug. And this is pretty much why we're here. Look at that belt. It just looks horrible. And that's for the front. That one's exposed. The other one's under this bracket back there. You can't really see it right now. But it doesn't look like they were ever replaced or any type of undercarriage maintenance was ever done. And then just start, removing these 10 millimeter bolts. There's going to be 2 on the top towards the back side of the engine. And I started using, a heavy drill, and it was way too much torque. These are just into plastic. So I ended up switching over to my lighter Ryobi one that I shared in the beginning of the video. A lot less torque and probably easier on it. And then there's another 10 millimeter in the back underneath the rear flap. All right, next up we got 2 10 millimeter bolts on each rear wheel. To get to them, you're going to need that ratcheting 10 millimeter wrench because you can't get anything else in there because it's behind the wheel. I don't want to take the wheels off, so you can get to them just with a ratchet and wrench and not have to worry about the wheels and more labor. Then, of course, once you're done with one side, move on over to the other side and same thing. Repeat the process. Moving on to get the front cover off of the top side. On the underside, there's going to be 2 additional 10 millimeter bolts. One you can get to pretty easily right here, and then the other one you're going to need an extension for to be able to reach it behind the drive motor. And here's a better visual of the second bolt. Like I said, you're going to need that extension to get to it. It's harder to reach without it. And mine was buried underneath you can see all the grass, compacted over on the other side. So just, remove any grass or any clip-ins that you're going to have jammed up in there and to be able to expose that bolt. And once you're done with that bolt, you go ahead and remove that top cover, and you can see why this belt failed. There's so much grass just jammed in there, it caused that belt to fail. So just make sure you get a good cleaning in there. I went ahead and brushed it and cleaned it deeply. This is probably a good, post-season minimum cleaning that you should do every season to avoid, that belt failing prematurely. Because I don't think this guy that I got this mower from ever did any type of cleaning or maintenance on this. All right, following that, just start removing the rear underside cover. Just manipulate it, wiggle it back and forth till it falls down and exposes that rear belt and drive. And then once I got the cover off, I realized why I had a sudden loss of power. The belt was actually off the rear pulley for the rear drive, and I imagine my front one was jammed and just never worked to begin with. And back up top, up front, we're going to remove this spring, just a retaining spring to keep that drive in place. And then I needed 2 hands for this, but you're essentially just going to squeeze this in and then pull it behind and through. And just to demonstrate how I got out of there, you use those needle nose and push those 2 clips in, and it pulls through, and then you pull the wire out through the side. And then just begin using that square bit to remove the 3 bolts. Make sure you put them in a safe place so you don't lose them. You don't want to get to the end of the project and be missing a bolt or have a spare bolt. But I wasn't very sure of the actual bit size of this one, but it's just a small square bit. It's not a Torx bit. It definitely has 4 sides for it. And then your 3rd bolt is behind this pulley, and you're just going to need a small extension to get to that. Then once that bolt is out, you can remove the bracket, the cover, and then start loosening your belt and pulling that out. And this belt was it was completely rotted, dry rotted. It was done for. And we're back underneath again, and there's going to be a spring holding the rear drive in position, and you're just going to release that spring, and it's going to allow the drive to pivot, which is going to allow you to have access to that bracket to be able to get the belt off. And once you get to the bracket, this bracket is essentially the same as the one on top. There's 1 bolt on this side, and it uses that that square bit, and there's 2 on this side. And you're just going to pull those out, and you'll be able to free the bracket. Alright, once those bolts are out, just go ahead and take off the bracket, and that allows you to take off the belt around the pulley. Next up, there's going to be 2 13mm bolts. I already removed the other 13mm bolt, but couldn't get a good visual of that one for you. But here's the other one. It just, above the blade, there's a guide for the belt, and you're going to want to remove one of the bolts and loosen the other one to be able to pivot that guide out of the way to get that belt off. Just practice some caution when you're working here, because you are above the blade, and it is a blade. It can cut you, it can hurt you, so just be wary of it. Wear thicker gloves if you think you're gonna grab it or make contact with it, unlike the blue latex gloves I have here. But once you get that bolt out, you can go ahead and pivot the bracket, and that's going to allow you to remove that belt, the front belt, from around that pulley. And you'll see here shortly that there's really no reason to take off the blade itself, but be that as it may, it is a perfect opportunity while doing this job. If your blade needs sharpened, needs balanced, needs replaced, just by all means just take the blade off. Mine was fine. I didn't need any of that, so there was really no reason for me to remove it, since you can take the belt off around the blade itself without removing it. And as you can see, I wasn't kidding. This belt was done for. Then once you get the new belt around the blade, just, you're going to be positioning it around the pulley that's above the blade, and then putting it through the access hole for the front pulley that's on the front top side of the mower itself. and just kind of pull it tight here, and then position that belt bracket back in place while you're working it. And then you're going to replace those two 13mm bolts. And while I'm working here, I just forgot to mention earlier that when you do lift up your mower to work on the underside, just ensure that you lift it with the air filter side facing up. I think Toro does recommend that you drain the gas, but I was about a quarter of a tank full, and I didn't see any issues. I did not lift it fully sideways, so I'm not saying, if you lift it fully sideways, you're going to have gas leaking out or issues. But I'm not saying you won't. So just bear that in mind. And if you want to drain the fuel, go right ahead. But I didn't need to, just lifting it about at a 70-degree angle. And I just quickly wrapped the front belt around the front pulley just to avoid it slipping off or falling through again. Then you're just going to start on the back belt. So just, loop it around that blade and then position it around the pulley above the blade and then around the rear drive pulley. And just remember that pulley has, pivoted down because you don't have the bracket, you don't have the spring on there holding it in place. So just position around the pulley and kind of pivot the drive forward. And then I wasn't able to get it on camera here, but you're going to put that bracket in place and that spring back in place. The also not so fun part was getting these, and I would actually say this is probably the most difficult out of everything. Everything else was pretty smooth and pretty easy, but this was just kind of tedious. But essentially you want to position the belt cover itself first, and then you're going to put in the most rear cover, because the belt cover itself has a little lip on it, and if you do not put that in first, you will not get it in after the fact. So position that in first, and then this kind of slides around it, and you're able to manipulate it and position it correctly. And once you get it in position, or a position you think it's sitting pretty flush, just ensure that, remember those 7 bolts you took out, and just ensure that all those eyelets are, lined up, and you'll be able to rethread all those bolts again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 on the other side, and the back side too. Back on top, you're just putting that bracket over the pulley and 3 square bit bolts in place, and then the drive cable is getting pushed through. And then don't forget the retaining spring on there as well, and just ensure everything's lined up and good. Then you're ready for the front cover, and it's just, remember those 2 10mm bolts underneath. Then of course just take it out for a test drive and ensure everything is working properly. And man, these all-wheel drive ones definitely pull. Definitely a good cut on them. Highly recommend.